left.
Yeah, guys, we are halfway through. Hey, halfway through. So you must have still a lot of power in you. Yes. Don't give up yet. Yes. Please, after Venice, maybe. Oh, go to Venice and see the sun and all the artwork, etc. Yeah, but tonight we are going on with a lecture, philosophy style, and it should be actually somebody else, his name is Baudrillard, and he was not available. Jean, come down! No, don't. Come on, more fun down there than up here. But we try to get as close as possible to the scene of philosophy. You know, every nation obviously has a certain amount, a certain years. In Germany it was the 19th century. In France it was the time after 45, where suddenly, as it happens, a group of philosophers came about and were discussing with each other and fighting and all this little trouble. You know, I remember my first conference was on Paul Ricoeur in the Sorbonne, and it was the first time all these people, Levinas, Derrida, and some other came together, and it was organized by an American philosopher, Anna Teresa Timienieczka. And they said only she could do that. Only an American philosopher lady could bring these people together in one room. You know, so it was, Baudrillard was not there actually. But anyway, we have the luck that one guy is still alive and kicking and strong and is not only a witness to this great time of French philosophy, also a collaborator, has done books with and alone. So he is a thinker in its own right, and still somebody who can tell us what has happened in this time, because we are on the shoulders of these peoples. The point is certainly we just have not to give up and say, okay, they know everything. So that is the point you need to start thinking yourself. But it's good to be reminded where the starting point is. So please welcome Sylvère Lotringer.
So I'll have to stand on my own shoulders. I don't think I'll be tall enough. I'll do my best. Okay. Last night, it was yesterday, last year, at the same time, I talked about the first of the two pamphlets that Baudrillard wrote in 1977, which is in fact a very interesting year because it's a cut-off point for French theory. I would say that French theory in France existed until 1977 as such, and at that time it was replaced by a media theorist, as Jean-Pierre Lévy, etc. So that was the end, at least the people survived it, but the environment, the intelligentsia, the French environment changed entirely from then on. France was becoming American and becoming mediatized. So at that time, Baudrillard wrote two pieces. One directed two pamphlets. It was his first two pamphlets. He wrote actually three. And they were important because they marked the mutation in his theory. Up until then, he had practiced what could be called critique or deconstruction. And what he did that in all sorts of directions: the deconstruction of Marx, of Freud, of course, but also of a number of other theorists, anthropologists, etc. And the cutting off point for him was in 1976 when he published Symbolic Exchange and Death, when in a way he reconnected with the philosophies that was developed in the 30s and 40s by Bataille, Artaud, etc., and established a bridge between what had been developed since the aftermath of '68 to what existed before. If you want, he went one step backwards in order to make two steps forward. And immediately what he put together in symbolic exchange days, which I'm not going to talk about, it's a very kind of scaffolding for most of what he will do for the rest of his life, was a certain discovery of a logic that he called a symbolic exchange, which was alternative and adversary to the movement of capital, which is a principle of the system of exchangeability, the principle of equivalence, etc. So at that time, he wrote then the Forget Foucault, which was an attempt to climb on the shoulders of Foucault, from whom he learned a lot. But as you could understand, the best way you have to thank a master is to not only go on his shoulders, but topple him. That's what it is. Not wickedly, but theoretically, basically extrapolated from Foucault and became more Foucauldian than Foucault, something that Foucault couldn't tolerate. And the result was some sort of excommunication of Baudrillard from the French intelligentsia, and probably one of the reasons he was not at this August meeting of minds, right? Okay. The second pamphlet he published, which I'm going to talk about, is called In a Shadow of Silent Majorities, and addresses the media, but through the media it addresses the hope that the Marxists were putting in the masses. And I remind you that 77 was a time where Italian and German terrorists was raging. In other words, it was a time where ideological groups, Marxist-Leninist groups, in despair of seeing the communist parties not only breaking with the Soviet Union, but breaking with the idea of revolution, took action and revolution in their hands. And precisely the pamphlet of Baudrillard, I'm not going to address that aspect, but the pamphlet of Baudrillard was dealing with the entire situation there, the position of Marxism, indirectly the fact that the terrorists were relying on the media to address the masses, but also and especially were there masses anymore, and could you mobilize them? So that's what I want to talk about. Factory work used to be the breeding ground for class struggle and its hoped for outcome proletarian revolution. In the 60s, thanks to the new industrial technologies, a vastly improved organization meant to exorcise the specter of worker struggle was put together. Traditional forms of concentration and oppression tied to labor, the assembly line, etc., evaporated, giving the way to what now the Italian call the post-Fordist area. In other words, a certain mutation which was not perceived in a society as such, but was felt by every single philosopher. It was what Baudrillard called the end of production. Deleuze and Guattari called the collapse of superstructure and infrastructure. It was also the disappearance of the working class as such, as a proletarian army ready to take over to take the initiative and take over the government and change the regime and install a dictatorial proletariat as Marx had predicted. So it was a turning point, a passage from what Italians call the Fordism or Taylorism, the rationalization of work, to post-Fordism, which means a total transformation of relation in production, the replacement of living work by what used to be called dead work, which became the machine, and slowly the transformation of society from a place defined by its exclusion of the workers from the mainstream society in factories, etc., the way the mad had been excluded before, and before them the lepers, according to the work of Foucault, but that this reversal, the reversal that occurred, meant that the entire society was put to work.